If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good, and I'm so honored today and privileged to have Jim Puckett, who is the executive director and founder of the Basel Action Network. He was 22 years at Greenpeace. He is the one who brought us the e-waste crisis to the United States and around the world on PBS, 60 Minutes, NPR, CBC, and the BBC. He's with us today at Green is Good. Welcome, Jim Puckett.
Thank you, John.
Hey, we're so honored to have you, Jim. You know this is first of all, just for truth in advertising, I am a good friend of yours. I think the world of you, and you do some of the greatest work leading the green revolution. And Mike and I are really honored and privileged to have you here today. And this show is all yours to explain what's going on in the world of e-waste, the fastest growing solid waste stream in the world. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you went to Greenpeace, what you did there, and how then you were the founder and become the executive director of the Basel Action Network.
Well, I've been involved in this issue that we call toxic trade for quite some time, most of my working life. And it was some years ago that I worked for Greenpeace, and we helped create an international treaty to stop what we call the most egregious forms of toxic trade, which is dumping your toxic waste on developing countries, the rich countries basically sweeping out their problem to the poor. And this convention said, no, you don't do that. That's externalizing costs. That's immoral. It's putting risks on people that had nothing to do with the problem in the first place, and it should not happen. And so there was a treaty born, and one of the first decisions that treaty made was to ban this type of trade. Well, we found out in 2001, when we went to China in December of that year, we found out that the lion's share of our electronic garbage, our electronic waste, was being exported in contravention of this treaty to China and other developing countries. And we went there for the first time. We didn't bring the e-waste crisis. We brought the cameras to it and discovered it, and brought those images back to North America and showed it in our first report and film called Exporting Harm back in 2002. What we witnessed was just this massive tide of toxic waste, and e-waste is toxic waste, that was being exported to the area called Guiyu, China, which is still, unfortunately, the ground zero of this international trade. Still gets most of the material from North America to this one region of China, and there the most egregious forms of very primitive recycling take place with great impacts to the public and the environment there, where they're taking this, very modern, high-tech stuff and dealing with it in Stone Age technologies and putting the toxics right into the environment, right into their children's bloodstream. It's very sad what we witnessed. And it's still going on today. So our job now is to try to put a stop to that, and that's what's keeping us very busy.
Just for our listeners who we have across America and then around the world when other people upload the show on iTunes after it airs on the Clear Channel Radio Network coast to coast, what is e-waste? Just as a basic 101 lesson, Jim, how do you define e-waste?
Well, it can be defined really broadly. Basically, everything that has a circuit or a battery, when you don't need that material anymore and you're going to go discard it, it's e-waste. And it ranges from everything to electronic greeting cards,
wow. Good point.
Computers, everything that has a little circuit board in it. And nowadays, more and more things that we just take for granted as not being electronic are electronic. So we're finding electronic waste is proliferating rapidly.
Well,
again, it wouldn't be such a horrible problem were it not for the fact that it's toxic waste, and we have to be very careful how we deal with it.
So we're talking about even our Kindles, our iPhones, our new 3D televisions. This is all under the e-waste heading.
Absolutely.
And Jim, for people who may be thinking, well, it's just electronics, how can that be toxic? Break it down for us.
Well, the problem is that the designers of this material never really faced up to the fact that it was going to die and someday become a waste, and they just used whatever was the most proficient from the front end, not thinking about the back end. And so they have used for a long time now lead in solders, mercury in lamps, cadmium in the material, brominated flame retardants. All of these things are either immortal toxics, like the metals last forever,
Right.
or they're very persistent toxics, like the organic materials like brominated flame retardants. And these persistent toxins are very insidious because they get into our fatty tissue, build up in the food chain, and, for example, all of us now have brominated flame retardants in our bodies, and the impacts of those are still not well known. But the heavy metals have been with us for centuries, and those impacts are well known. And lead, for example, causes brain damage and circulatory system damage in children. And unfortunately, some of the highest levels of lead in blood has been found in the children of the area of Guayu I spoke about.
Well, there's no one who's done more for this issue than you, quite frankly, in terms of bringing it around the world, in terms of raising its visibility. And one of the great examples of what you did was the CBS 60-Minute program. How did that come about, and how did you get them to come and focus on this issue?
Well, it's ironic because in 2002, we really tried to get 60 Minutes to cover what we had just found out about in Guayu. And we came back with our film footage, and we could not interest them at the time to do something about it. But 6.5 years later, right, they decided to do the program, and we're really grateful they did. The problem had gotten even worse when I went back 6.5 years later. It had proliferated mightily, so that there were many more operations, much more scale of the dirty things that were happening, like the acid stripping operations. These are people that are trying to get a little bit of gold out of the circuitry. It's very minute quantities of gold, so they use massive quantities of acids to try to leach out that gold, and invariably they operate right on the riverbanks, and they flush all the residues, including the heavy metals, brominated flame retardants I'm talking about, right into the river. And this has gotten far worse since I first went there. There's also it's the only place in the world where you'll see a whole industry, a whole labor force, where their whole job is to cook circuit boards. And they put them on little shallow woks, just like they were cooking stir-fry, and slap those circuit boards down on those hot plates and start pulling the chips off, which then go to the acid strippers. And the solder is being breathed the whole time, which is lead-tin-based, both toxic metals. And mostly women are involved in this activity, but throughout the whole area, women and children are the predominant workforce, and they're the ones getting the brunt of the contamination.
You know, Jim, you mentioned China and other developing nations. Is this material also being shipped off to India, Africa, and other countries?
Absolutely. So we witnessed it in Africa in 2005. We did a similar expedition and investigation, produced another film called The Digital Dump. And in Africa, it was a little bit of a different scene in that they weren't doing so much of the dirty materials recovery operations like the gold stripping. We didn't see that going on. They were trying to bring in product that they could sell in the marketplace. The problem is the container loads they were receiving from the United States had about 75% junk in it that could not even be sold in the African marketplace. So even though they're very good at repairing things in Africa at low cost, the people receiving these containers admitted they had to throw away 3/4 of the load in order to sell the other 25%. And what was happening with the stuff they were throwing away was it was routinely being burned in informal dumps all around the area of Lagos, Nigeria, where we were. You can see this on our website photos and the film that you can order from our website.
Hey,
But,
Jim, that first of all, just for you, if you've just joined us now, we're on with Jim Puckett, the executive director and founder of the Basel Action Network. He's got 2 amazing websites with lots of these videos from 60 Minutes, PBS, and many others. You can go to ban.org or e-stewards.org. Jim, I didn't mean to cut you off. Frame the problem a little bit in the United States. It's a massive problem, and I would love you to frame for our listeners how much e-waste is there in the United States, and how much of is it really being recycled domestically in an appropriate legal and environmental way, and how much is really going to these developing nations?
Well, globally, I don't have the figures for me in the U.S., but globally we are producing 50 million metric tons of e-waste a year.
Wow.
It's just massive quantities, and that translates to many tons of lead every year, hundreds of tons of lead, just to give one example of a pollutant. And the question is, why is it being exported?
Yeah.
Why is this happening?
Right.
It's pretty clear that this is the age-old solution, supposedly, to pollution that has always existed with us. You find someone else to deal with your problem. You externalize your costs, as economists call it. You find a way to sweep it away where you don't have to pay the bill. And what better way nowadays, when we're increasingly making it more expensive to do the wrong thing with pollutants in our country, what better than to find the pathways of intermodal transport and globalization to find countries where those requirements to internalize the cost, to take care of the problem, are not required. And so that's what's been happening, is people realize that e-waste, even though you can get some value out of it, taken as a whole, it's a net negative value. It's a service that you're giving to society to take care of e-waste and to deal with it properly. It's a negative cost. So in order to get rid of that negative cost on their books, they export it to places where nobody's ever going to present them with the bill to cover the damage. And that's what's been going on. So in the real terms, what happens is a recycler, an unscrupulous recycler in North America, and there's far too many of them, will take an environmental fee up front, say $10 for a monitor or something like that. They'll tell the consumer, you've got to pay me this money because this is full of lead and problems, and I've got to deal with it, so give me $10 and I'll take your monitor for you. They pocket that fee, and then they stick it on a container, get another fee from the broker who's getting pennies on the pound for getting the copper, et cetera, out of it. And so they get paid on both ends, don't do very much work at all, and make a killing, literally, doing this type of trade. And this is precisely what the Basel Convention said we had to put a stop to. And unfortunately, the United States is the only developed country in the world that has not ratified the Basel Convention. So they've not become a party to this treaty, which I talked about, saying this is not okay.
Right.
So it's legal. It's legal to do this in the United States. We have almost zero laws controlling the export. We have a very weak rule called the CRT rule, which deals with cathode ray tubes, the big monitors and TV tubes. But it is so full of loopholes that, just to give you an example how easy it is to circumvent it, all you have to do if you want to export truckloads and container loads of CRTs is to say it's going to be reused. And that's all you've got to do, and away that material can go. And right now, that material is primarily going to Asia. So when you go and dump your big old monster TV at a recycler, very, very good odds it's going to go to Asia. There are precious few recyclers, and we have taken on ourselves to organize these leaders in the industry that are doing the right thing. But they are there, and I want to talk about that before we get off the phone, about how you as a consumer can do the right thing.
We're going to do that, and I want to just ask one more question for our listeners out there. Besides the environmental harms that are absolutely occurring in China and other developing nations that you have well pointed out, and again, I ask our listeners to go look at your well-done websites, ban.org or e-stewards, e-stewards.org. The videos are there, the CBS, the Frontline. There's so many great highlights that Jim has created to show you exactly what's going on over there. But Jim also explained another subtlety that our listeners should be aware of and be worried about. If their e-waste is disposed of inappropriately, besides massive environmental harms being done potentially here in the United States or abroad, isn't there privacy issues and security issues that they should be concerned about also?
Absolutely. You'd be shocked about the kind of data that's available when people indiscriminately dispose of their electronic waste, data that can be used by fraudsters anywhere in the world. And when we went to Nigeria, we were aware of this, and we grabbed some hard drives in the marketplace. Incidentally, those hard drives we thought it was outrageous. Once they found out we were interested, and then they were charging us like $20 a piece for them. Wow. But I'll conclude that story in a minute. But we got those hard drives, and we sent them to a forensic analysis company in Switzerland.
Right.
And it was very easy for them. They just immediately were able to pull the data down. And we found data there. We found data from the World Bank. We had Child Protective Custody Services from Wisconsin.
Unreal.
All kinds of information, CVs, employment records, bank card numbers, amazing stuff that if we had have been the bad guys, we could have stolen people's identity, we could have done blackmail, we could have done fraud of all kinds. And here it was coming to West Africa, which frankly is famous for that type of fraud, and it's still coming there by the volumes. The flip side of the story of the $20 per hard drive, since we were there, now if you go to Africa in the same marketplace and say, I want a hard drive that's not been wiped, that all the data is intact, and it's still a grab bag for the buyer, the price is now more like $250 a hard drive because they know the fraud potential.
Wow.
So this is an indication that the marketplace of bad guys has caught up with this issue. They're going to steal your data, and it's all the more reason to take good care of how you deal with your electronics.
Wow. Now, one of the great things that Mike and I love about our show is when we have leaders like you on who are true visionaries and leaders, we really love to be solution-based. Can you now walk our listeners through the real reasons why you created Basel Action Network and the solutions that your great organization then provides for consumers who do really want to do the right thing, and also for businesses that want to do the right thing but truly are at a loss to how to do that?
Sure. So we, in lieu of having our country being a party to the Basel Convention and being cooperative to try to stop this type of trade, there's two basic ways any activist tries to find a solution. And one is legislative, trying to make a law to stop this bad stuff, and we're still trying to do that.
Right.
But the other thing you can do is market-based solutions, which sometimes can move a lot faster than legislation. And so we have created a market-based solution, a certification program called eStewards. And these are the good recyclers, the leaders in the industry. And eStewards.org is the place where you can find them.
Gotcha.
And these are people that are going to uphold the highest standard, the gold standard, which is called eStewards Standard, and are certified by independent auditors that go out under certification bodies' rules and regs. And those certification bodies, in turn, are accredited by certified accredited bodies. And it's all the cops watching the cops, basically.
Right.
And it's very rigorous. So these companies now that have agreed to do this say, we know we have a crisis here with e-waste. It's complete anarchy. There's a lot of cowboys operating out there. They have signed up for this program, and they are offering consumers this type of responsibility. It's a tiny bit more expensive, but it's not that much more expensive, and they'll take care of your data. They'll take care that they're not going to contaminate the environment, etc. And you can find this growing list of eStewards recyclers on our database there on that website. It's growing rapidly, and additionally, we're getting buy-in from major companies. Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Samsung are just three examples of companies that have declared themselves as eStewards enterprises, meaning that they are going to make best efforts for all of their facilities, and all of these companies have massive amounts of computers they use, of course.
Right.
For all of their own e-waste, they are going to direct it toward eStewards. And just recently, we just announced up here in King County, where I live and operate in the Seattle area, that whole King County is going to become an eStewards enterprise, as has in California, down where you are, John, Santa Clara, Silicon Valley County. Santa Clara County has declared themselves as an eStewards enterprise organization. That means all of the county e-waste will be directed to these good recyclers. It will not be going offshore.
I mean, it sounds like, Jim, the time has come. We're truly at a crossroads, and all of your hard work back to all your years at Greenpeace, and also the creation of the Basel Action Network and how you've climbed the mountain, that now people are excited and really needing to listen to what you have to say, because this has reached crisis proportions.
Well, I think what you say is true. I've been very frustrated, and we've been diligently plodding away here, trying to wake people up to the problem. We've done a darn good job of getting on the major outlets like 60 Minutes, etc. and it's had a result. So we are, I believe, at the tipping point of public awareness. And you see that more and more people now are asking for e-stewards. More and more politicians are saying there ought to be a law.
Good.
And the tipping point is here now where we have that critical mass of people that are aware that there is an issue about e-waste, that this waste stream is the fastest growing toxic waste stream on the planet right now, that it's reaching crisis proportions, and that we're not dealing with it properly. We're just dumping it on our global neighbors. People are starting to be aware so that we're going to see real change, and I'm seeing it every day in these last months.
You know, Jim, we're down, unfortunately, to the last minute and a half, and of course we're going to have you back because we want to hear how your wonderful organization progresses this year. But can you just share whatever pearls of wisdom you have in terms of other young people that want to be the next Jim Puckett and that truly want to move new concepts and new industries and new thoughts forward? Share back a little bit about, your journey and where you're going to be going in the coming years.
Well, to be successful in this kind of work, you just got to have a passion for this planet. You've got to care. You want to make a difference. I think so many of us have that, but then you've got to add to that just dogged determination and diligence. Just don't let up. When it looks for so many years like nobody cared at all about this issue, finally we're seeing people waking up and doing something about it. So you can't give up on those periods of time where you think the world is in the slow reading group, and they're just not going to ever understand. You've got to stick with it. And for all the consumers out there, just be really careful of what you do with your electronic waste. There'll be many charlatan and rogue companies mantling themselves in the green cloak, saying that they're going to do the greatest things on earth. You cannot trust what they say on their website. You cannot. You have got to go to our group, which is actually going to be audited and checked and certified that they are doing the right thing. So we urge you to reward these leaders in the industry, the e-stewards recyclers. Go to our website and find them.
That is just great. Thank you, Jim. Mike and I, this is quite an education. Our listeners are going to so appreciate your knowledge and how you've directed them today, because once people do know the right thing, they do want to act the right way, but it's this void in knowledge out there that creates a lot of this confusion. And for all your listeners out there who want to, again, read more about Jim and his great organization, the Basel Action Network, BAN.org, and to find the list of e-stewards, please go to e-stewards.org. Jim Puckett, you are a visionary leader and truly living proof that green is good.